The SG-1 creator Brad Wright has been talking about how rules in sci-fi matter. And that got me so just warm and tingly inside. I do love Brad Wright. Welcome to Trek, your sci-fi TV and movie channel. But Brad Wright has been talking about one of the big reasons why Stargate was so consistently brilliant. The rules. They established a set of rules at the beginning of SG-1, and then they mostly followed them. Or, at very least, if they broke them, they came up with a good reason why. Brad Wright actually talks about how, in fact, the rules that they establish are what a lot of the stories then come from. For example, the Stargate can only open for 38 minutes.
Run 7 is locked.
How many times did that then create really interesting stories for the SGC? Them being attacked, but your enemy, because they've got a proper DHD, could dial in faster than you could. So they kept holding the gate open and stopping us from escaping. Or we dial into a black hole and all of a sudden it's locked in to an endless power supply. Those rules created so many interesting stories, and sometimes when those rules were then broken or bent, it was done with a good reason, with a plan, maybe some techno-babble, but it was always done with some consistency. Now, this actually comes from a companion article. There is a link in the description to go over to the companion and particularly to listen to the audio version of this article. He wrote this some time ago, but the articles this way are a new thing for the companion. Please go and check it out and have a listen. Brad really does talk about a lot of really fascinating examples of why he thinks sometimes those rules in things like Star Trek and Star Wars have affected the story. Now, I am also a Trekkie. Star Trek was my first love. But, then Stargate came and stole my heart. But Star Trek was my first love. And Star Trek, at times, infuriates me. But we keep being told by Trekkies that we shouldn't worry too much about canon. When they change these rules, don't stress it. It's still Star Trek, and all Star Trek is brilliant Star Trek. Now, I disagree. I think canon and the rules do matter. If you establish something very clearly in an episode, then that becomes gospel. And if you're going to then break it, you better have a good reason. In the article that I'm talking about, Brad Wright mentions the J.J. Abrams movies, where all of a sudden you could beam, because Scotty just thought it up, from a planet to a vessel already very far away while it's traveling at warp. That's a nonsense. Transporters are only good from basically very short ranges from orbit to the land. They do not do light years. Then, in the second Star Trek movie, Khan beamed himself from a little shuttle. I don't know how powerful that shuttle was, but it must have had one hell of a battery. And he beamed himself all the way to Kronos, the Klingon homeworld, halfway across the galaxy. Again, an absolute nonsense. Why are we bothering with starships if that is possible? They never bothered really to explain how that was possible, other than Scotty came up with some calculations. That's a nonsense. Now, the J.J. Abrams people will say, well, this is a different universe, though. This is a different set of rules. But that's just a cop-out and it's lazy. Brad Wright is talking about how that is really the difference between science fiction and fantasy. Now, Star Wars is more fantasy, but he then also points out, though, that in one of the later Star Wars movies, one of the Republic vessels turns around and shoots into that big, massive vessel and wipes out an entire armada of Empire vessels by hitting it at warp. He points out, why didn't they do that sooner? Why didn't they do that when, I don't know, battling the Death Star? They had loads of vessels there. Just shoot one of them into it at light speed. It's problem solved. You wouldn't even need, if you planned ahead, to have anybody on board. You could computer program it. So if actually hitting an enemy vessel at light speed is such a devastating weapon, Why wasn't it used previously? So if you're going to do something very clever like that that looks pretty, at least explain it. Or it really does make a nonsense of it being sci-fi. Now, Star Wars isn't sci-fi. It's way more fantasy than it is sci-fi, but it still should have some rules to it. And when those rules are broken, because we're not completely thick, it frustrates us. Now, all the Trekkies that say canon doesn't matter, it really is, again, a bit of a cop-out. You're giving the creators of the new Trek an excuse to do what they want. Now, occasionally, New Trek actually emphasizes this point. They will make a little comment. They'll have them make even a little joke out of the fact that, like, Spock is now completely different and things like this. To me, though, it's just frustrating. I'm trying really hard to ignore a lot of the rule breaking in Star Trek. I even did a video a couple of weeks ago saying, look, let's just pretend it's not really Star Trek. It's Star Trek 2.0. And that way, all of these errors and all of these changes to canon just don't matter because it's not really Star Trek anymore. But even that, to be honest, is giving them an out. They should set up these rules and they then should stick to them. And when they then break them, come up with a good reason why, because it makes brilliant stories. It's not that difficult if you plan ahead. Now, with the new Stargate series, if we believe the rumours that we've been hearing, Mark Fergus and Hawk Ostby are planning to develop this series. And one of the things they've been doing now for months is establishing a set of rules. That is the Bible and a timeline that the new creators will then stick to. Apparently, Amazon have given them permission to bend the rules in a few places and to change a few things that fit the storyline. But I am reassured that, assuming these rumours are true, that Hawk Ostby and Mark Fergus are thinking the same way as Brad Wright. That is so important to establish those rules at the outset and then to try very hard not to break them, like Brad Wright almost did. And the very first episode, pretty much the first scene of SG-1, he said that the gate is basically one way. That was a rule that was established in the movie and one that they agreed. Now, they created some addendums for those rules. They basically said, look, radio waves, because it has no mass, they can travel two-way. Brilliant, very clever. But matter cannot travel two-way through the Stargate. Unfortunately, when Pophis and his men arrived in the very opening sequence of Children of the Gods, the gate stayed open. They attacked the SGC and they kidnapped a few flight officers. They then turned around and walked back through the gate. Brad Wright and co. didn't even realize their error until they were in the editing suite. So then they had to sort of like throw together a bit of a scene where we see Apophis ordering like a mobile DHD, and they had to sort of like figure it out that way. And he said, it never sat right. The scene doesn't fit the flow of the overall scene, and it really stuck out like a sore thumb. But thank God they at least realized it, or Brad Wright was saying, we'd have actually ruined one of the most important rules straight away. But Brad Wright did catch it and did think it was important enough to actually fix. I'm kind of wishing some of the guys from Star Trek could be so detail orientated and actually, when an error is realized, fix it. But unfortunately, at the moment at least, they don't bother so much. Instead, the Star Trek fans have to come up with excuses and reasons why the mistakes still make sense. But hey, it gives us Trekkies something to do, that we have to figure out ways to make your mistakes make sense. Thanks very much. Please go over to the companion and check out the full interview. Not only does it give you an insight into Brad Wright, the creator of one of the greatest TV shows ever made, but also it really should give you an idea of what sci-fi should be and why sci-fi at the moment is a little bit, and why some of the sci-fi we're watching at the moment is so frustrating because they don't follow the rules. Brad Wright actually says at one point that he thinks he could create a really kick-ass Star Trek or Star Wars script that fit the rules that have been established and was still exciting, if only they'd let him. If only they'd let him. But guys, what do you think about this idea that rules actually do matter? And when they get broken for no good reason, it's just frustrating. Does it matter to you? Or do you think, no, look, calm down. Don't worry about canon too much. Let's just have good stories. Is that more important than canon? Get into the comments and tell me exactly what you're thinking. If you are new to the channel, please like, subscribe, hit that bell notification. It really helps us out. And you can follow all these links that have been streamed across the bottom here. They're in the description too for all really good Sci-Trek stuff, including the Patreon account where you get to see most of our videos first. And for a small fee each month that really supports the channel, you get to see them without the adverts. And you can even get a free gift. Can't say fairer than that. As always, guys, please stay safe, and I'll see you next time.